Hi, I'm April. I am a singer-songwriter and music teacher, and today we're going to talk a little bit about how to make up a chord progression. Remember that if you do enjoy this video, please give it a like, make sure to subscribe, and leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. So our first step is going to be thinking about the emotional tone of your song. Is this going to be a song that's a little bit sadder? Is it going to be happier? Is it more kind of bittersweet? Start thinking about what it is that you want to write your song about, or if you already have lyrics to go along with this chord progression, start thinking about what those lyrics are kind of saying emotionally. From there, you can start to think about the key of your song. So if you wanted to write a really happy song, a lot of people are going to choose to write in major. If you want to use minor, it's going to sound a little bit sadder. Now, those are just general kind of feelings that we tend to associate with those keys, but they don't necessarily have to be like that. So you can use a major chord progression and write really sad lyrics. The only thing that you're going to have to do is work against the concept of prosody. So the idea that you want your song's form, the structure, the theory, all of those good things to match up with what your song is actually about. The best reasons not to use prosody are trying to create juxtaposition, either for the sake of humor or to make something sound creepy, or just to undercut the emotional core of your song. Every Step You Take by The Police is a great example of this because you're hearing these really super creepy lyrics to this really happy sounding song. Same thing goes with Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. The worry there becomes that your audience might misinterpret what it is that you're trying to say to them, as tends to happen with those two songs in particular. You're also free to play around with things like modes or different scales that aren't major and minor. You can use the pentatonic scale, which basically eliminates all dissonance in the scale, which makes things sound really pretty. It's used really often in a lot of pop music because there is such a lack of dissonance. So that's really useful when you want to write something that is a little bit happier, or something that's supposed to sound really pretty or really sing-alongable. For the sake of ease, I'm just going to use the key of C major, so that would be every white note from C to the other C. The next step here is to start thinking about the order of the chords you want to use. The best method that I've heard for coming up with what order to put your chords in is the idea of thinking of your chord progression like a car. So what you can do is think about how your car takes you from one place to the next throughout the day. Since in the key of C, our one chord is C, C becomes our home. And so that means when we start our song, it makes the most sense to start at home. Now, sometimes you're going to start the day after having slept over at somebody else's house, or sometimes you're going to have fallen asleep at work and you wake up and you're like, how did I get here on this pile of papers? But most days you're going to start at home. And most of the time, you're going to end your day at home as well. So if we're starting our chord progression on C, on our home, we probably want to go somewhere else, or else we're just going to be hanging out at home all day, which is nice sometimes. And if you do that, then it's called a pedal, which is just something that kind of lasts throughout the whole song underneath. But if you are having your average day, you're not going to sit at home all day. In fact, you're probably going to go to a few different places. So for instance, in the key of C, your 5 chord is G. So G is a major chord, but whenever you're sitting on G for a while, it really feels like you want to go home back to that C, or back to that one chord. So I like to think of G as maybe some place that you go every day, that you like going to, but maybe that gets really boring or really tedious after a while, like some place that you kind of have to stay for a really long time, and by the end of the day you really want to go home. So for a lot of people, that is work or that is school, just a place that you have to go really, really often that feels good, but feels like some place you don't want to spend your whole day. Your 4 chord, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily feel like it needs to go home immediately, right? You can be on your 4 chord and move somewhere else, and it's not going to feel quite as intense. It's not going to feel like you need to go home immediately. Your 4 chord, for instance, could be like your grocery store, or it could be your friend's house. It could even be your house of worship, right? Because we even get this Amen sound when we go to our one chord. So again, it doesn't necessarily feel like it needs to go to the one chord, but it also feels like when it does, you feel pretty good about it. Now you can basically do this whole concept for just about any chord in any key and try to make it work or fit how you feel about those chords. But the only other one that I'm going to talk about is going to be the A minor. And the reason the A minor feels like an important chord to go over in this particular key is the fact that it is the relative minor. So all that means is that it's our 6th scale degree. And the 6th scale degree of any major key is going to be the relative minor of that key. So when you play an A minor scale, you're using the exact same notes that you would in a C major scale. You're just starting 6 notes to the right. Now, the thing that becomes really interesting with an A minor chord in the key of C is that it still sounds kind of like the home. So because our C chord is made up of C, E, and G, and our A minor chord is A, C, and E, we're using 2 of the same notes, which means they kind of innately sound similar. So if you've ever seen Stranger Things, I like to think of this as the upside down. So it's exactly the same house, it's just maybe empty and a little bit sadder, and there's something kind of gloomy about the same place that you were just really happy in. What becomes really interesting here is that now, instead of playing a C, you can play an A minor, and it's going to have the same effect, just a kind of saddened version of that effect. So if I wanted to play maybe C, F, and again, we can kind of linger on F because it doesn't sound too bad there, and then go to the 5 chord, and remember that G, our 5 chord, really wants to go back home, but instead of going back home, what I could do is go to A minor instead. And do you see how that just really changed the chord progression that we were using? It kind of gave us the idea that we were about to go home, but when we got there, it kind of felt like a little bit of a letdown. It felt like, oh. So that's what's called a deceptive cadence. And basically the entire concept is that we're kind of tricking our listener into thinking we're going one place and then actually going to another place that just feels similar, but almost kind of flipped on its head. So at this point, you can kind of experiment and figure out which chords you like within that key. You can even use chords that aren't in the key. You can use modal interchange and kind of find chords that don't necessarily fit the key but still feel exciting in your chord progression, kind of spice things up a bit. If you want to see a video on how to make your chord progressions a little more interesting, kind of add some flair to them, I made a video a while ago that is right here. Now at this point, you might just have a really great chord progression to work with, which is awesome. But you can also kind of mix things up a little bit further. You can maybe play around with chord extensions. You can play around with different inversions that you want to use. You can add suspended chords, you can add 7th chords. You can kind of go to town with this. And really the idea here is that you're just kind of mixing up your chord progression to sound a little bit different and a little more like what you've intended. So now let's say that I chose this progression. So that's C, E minor, F, G. And of course that G really wants to go home. Maybe to make that a little more interesting, I could turn that C into a C add 9. I could even do that with the F and the G. I could also use 7th chord. I could kind of play just a mix of a bunch of different things. But the point is, and step number 4, is just to experiment and just to kind of find the chords that you find fit the tone of your song and fit what you want to express in the emotions of your song. I hope that this video helped. If it did, make sure to leave a like, leave a comment, share it with your friends, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I would love to see you around here again.